from Andrew and from Nick. And then which students agreed to go first. Andrew.
This is an attempt to summarise Mark's varied life in the space of 5 minutes, so I'm calling it an advance for inadequacy. My brother Mark was the eldest of 3 sons. Our unusual surname comes from Sylvain Van de Weyer, one of the leaders of the Belgian Revolution of 1830, and a member of the very first provisional government of Belgium. He later became the Belgian ambassador in London and settled in England. His grandson, my grandfather, made his home in Dorset. Mark was born in London, near Lord's cricket ground, where Mark and I would spend many happy days there later. We had a lovely childhood, wonderful parents, lots of family activity and fun, some of that fun was with our grandmother here in Dorset. Mark attended Westminster School from the age of 13, but his education was pretty much a disaster. And this wasn't due to stupidity or lack of effort, it just didn't suit him, I think. His saving grace was that he wrote excellent English. He landed up with a couple of O levels and a rather low grade English A level. Hardly the expectation for a good pupil from Westminster. He was very keen on sport, but sadly, in his teens, he started to have problems with his back, which was much later diagnosed as ankylosing spondylitis, a progressive and painful illness that was with him for the rest of his life. For Mark, the high point at Westminster was when he was appointed as editor of our house magazine called The Clarion. And I think it was The Clarion, the experience with The Clarion, that prompted his decision to become a journalist. The turning point at that stage of Mark's life came at the age of 17 when he was offered a job as a junior reporter on the Luton News. He left school immediately and took a bedsit in Luton, and I remember very well his enthusiasm for his work. Mark, even then, was massively interested in reporting local events. Socially, Mark's life changed in Luton. He joined the heavy drinking culture of journalism, and he also made some lifelong friends, amongst them one David Candler, a frequent visitor to our home, where he and Mark would discuss Labour Party politics with our parents. David introduced Mark to his cousin, Catherine Candler, a musician, and they married in 1970. Mark became editor of the Tame Gazette, Tame near Oxford, at an amazingly young age of 21. I remember, however, after 4 or 5 years on this job, he told me that he'd come to the conclusion that local newspapers were in decline and that he needed to move on. And the obvious place for him to move on to was Fleet Street, and he joined the Financial Times. And it was after that, when he moved to London, that politics started to become very important to him. Alex was born in 1973, where they were living in Tufnell Park in Islington. Mark and Catherine had both joined the North Islington Labour Party, and Mark was soon elected as a local councillor in the London Borough of Islington. Labour Party politics there was a pretty toxic affair, but Mark loved the ups and downs, and he rose eventually to be head of finance for the London Borough of Islington. This was massively time-consuming. His marriage to Catherine broke down in 1977. Catherine and Alex moved to York, where Nick was born some years later. Mark remained closely in touch, and he and Catherine eventually became good friends. Mark was also a very important part of my family, and he, Alex, and my mother were often Mark and myself in South Wales, and he became an important uncle to our 3 children. Mark's political career came to an end when he was ousted by other factions in the Islington Labour Party. It's possible he wasn't all that sorry, because his job on the Financial Times had become much more interesting when he became the managing director of their stable of financial magazines. But, however, in 1998, Pearson's Publications, who were the Financial Times and all the magazines, brought in a man called Stephen Hill, who was dubbed Slasher Hill by Private Eye, who sacked a whole level of management, including Mark, despite Mark's fine record in making money for the company. This was a very heavy blow to Mark. Mark and I remember at that time sitting in a wine bar in North London, And I suggested to Mark that this was an occasion when he wanted to take a break in life before doing anything else. I couldn't say my breath, and I don't think that Mark understood the concept of taking a break. It wasn't natural to him. He went into partnership immediately with some others in a press cutting business. This was successful, as were other ventures into publishing. And Mark didn't actually start to wind down. He started to wind down during his 60s, but he remained involved in early morning media right up until the time of his death. Mark's relationship with Caroline started over 30 years ago. Mark was then living in Chelsea Harbour, central London. Caroline, also a journalist, had a houseboat on the Thames. Although Mark's health was declining with a combination of ankylosing spondylitis and a heart condition, his later years were very happy. He had more and more time for a full and varied social life. In London, he became chairman of the Barnes Cricket and Sports Club, an involvement he started when he was a qualified cricket umpire, and he also holds season tickets at West Ham Football Club. Mark had 3 grandchildren, Amy, Eloise and Oliver, and was also close to Caroline's grandchildren, Evelyn and Jezebel. He spent increasing amounts of time in Marchwood, where Caroline now lived, and here he became involved in lots of local activities, including reporting for the Bridport News, and then becoming editor of the Golden Cap magazine, as well as playing an important role in the local Citizens Advice Bureau and joining the Acorn Academy as a director. It's entirely appropriate for Mark to be buried here in Dorset because of the happy times he spent here, both in childhood and during his later years. Thank you very much.
A vivid memory of Mark, for many, is his 50th birthday party in 1998, which was held at the Victoria and Albert Museum in Kensington. This is an introduction to both London and the man, for me. His marriage to my mother having broken down years before, as related by Andrew. My personal recollection of travelling to London from Yorkshire as a wide-eyed teenager in my newly tailored suit is of Mark as an amiable, popular and dedicated professional. The seemingly endless tables of family, friends and colleagues was very impressive. Remarkably, I understood that there was little distinction for Mark between these groups, or indeed there has been for them in their celebration of this remarkable man. Family, friends and colleagues were together. Later that year, 1998, my mother died after a long battle with cancer, and before she had reached her 50th birthday. And it was at that time that my personal relationship with Mark really began to develop. I'd never known my biological father, and so it was Mark who didn't hesitate to step in. It was he who drove me to university and made clear to me that I was not alone and that he would be there for me to turn to. So it is that I stand here before you as a son, and I mourn the father. I'm so very grateful for his generosity and compassion. The often heard remark was how long Mark could continue in his seemingly frenetically paced and productive London lifestyle. I certainly don't think, as Andrew said, that any of us believed it would really change. Such a big part of Mark's identity that it was. As Andrew said, his earth-shattering departure from the Financial Times seemingly had no effect. He would go on to establish several publications and be involved in many successful ventures, perhaps becoming even busier than he was before. But one thing's clear, Mark had met his match and life partner in Caroline during their over 30 years together. Her move here to Marchwood in 2004 took Mark away from London for perhaps the first time outside the holidays spent with Andrew and Margaret and trips to family events of which he never missed. Perhaps family connections to Dorset contributed. Andrew has told us this weekend and just before of memories of visiting their grandmother in Dorchester, and I was interested to learn about Andrew and Mark's grandfather, her husband, Major William John Bates Van de Weyer, he who history records as having created a Buddleia hybrid, which bears the family name during the First World War, at his home near Corfe Castle on the Isle of Purbeck. He was also appointed High Sheriff of the county in 1942. But did this really influence Mark? In truth, I think the credit goes to Caroline, her family, and the good people of Dorset. As the balance of time spent in Dorset rather than London turned over the years, we are very grateful for the welcome of the people of this congregation, parish, and county. Thank you. It is remarkable that he never really did slow down his efforts, even after a very serious heart attack in 2006, which was news to many people here, including close family, as it was not widely disclosed. Up until the very end, he was very active and regularly had busy weekends in London, where he would see my brother Alex. And here in Dorset, it is remarkable yet not surprising how involved he became. Whether it was editor of the parish magazine or a regular contributor to Bridport News, where he continued his journalistic pursuits of truth, however inconvenient to the subject of the stories. With the positions he held in the Acorn Academy or with Citizens' Advice and the lives he touched here, there is no doubt that he left his mark on this community. But in all these titles, achievements and stories, we risk losing sight of the man. For it is Mark's knowledgeable compassion, genuine interest in people, and dedication that we will all remember. We are surrounded by his life here in Dorset as a devoted grandfather to Evelyn and Jezebel, just as he was to my two children, Eloise and Oliver, who are just starting their schooling, and to Alex's daughter, my niece Amy, who is in the middle of her undergraduate degree. Many stories of his generous spirit abound and are alive in us. He was always there with a sympathetic ear and a practical piece of advice. After hearing Mark speak so well at events, I know if he were here, he would have the perfect anecdote to share today. The right words to put us at ease and properly honour him. I used to think that Mark had a really strong and very developed sense of duty, that this was why he never missed an event and took an interest in so many people. I think now perhaps I was wrong though. I think he just cared so very, very much about people. I am lucky and privileged to have had him in my life, as are we all. Thank you very much.